they make money. Why are they not attacking Spain or Italy or the rest of them there? Because the markets don't care about what the banks are doing, because they can't support them indefinitely. And the markets don't know that.
They are attacking each of those countries. Again, very astute. They tend to do it one country at a time. They did it in Ireland last year. They've been doing it in Greece for the past 6 to 12, 18 months, which came to a head last month. Next, they will move on to Portugal, and then Spain, maybe Italy, Belgium, the Netherlands. It is going to happen. And to say that it's not happening is not correct, because, as I say, they've been selling Portuguese and Spanish debt like Billio. That is the reason why these countries have to borrow at such high interest rates, at more than double the interest rate that you and I as individuals could borrow. And yet a first world country has borrowing rates of 12 or 15%. Believe me, that is a result of significant attacks, and it is ongoing until those countries clearly are shown as bankrupt, as opposed to merely actually bankrupt.
Okay,
thank you very much.
All right, Steve, thanks for your call. Appreciate it. I know you've been waiting to speak to Jonathan, because I remember a couple of weeks ago you were looking for when he was coming back on, so glad you got through.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Cheers, Steve. Ta-da. Yeah, he's been waiting to get you back online. One of the things that I think is when a lot of people, when they talk, they often talk as if this crash is going to be like lights out and everything stops. It feels to me like these crashes aren't really like that. They're like growing up. They happen day in, day out as a gradual process. And it is actually happening even while we're speaking. We're just not actually noticing it. But it's there. It's here already. We're living it.
We are absolutely living it, and you will know, everyone knows the poverty that is being experienced by tens of millions right across the EU. In the US, listen, 46 million Americans are on food stamps. I'll let that seep in for a moment. There is a huge poverty right across the Western world, and that's exactly the point. The powers that be are trying to ensure that this depression comes at us in drips and drabs, shall we say, like a Chinese water torture. Unfortunately, what that means is that we're going to be experiencing it for 20 or 30 years.
Yes.
Whereas if they listen to people like me, it's not just me, I assure you, if they listen to people like me, then we would take very significant hits for a couple of years, from which we could then have economic growth. Instead, people are going to be in poverty for a generation, I'm afraid to say.
Let's stick, seeing as we've moved into this area and we're talking about Eurozone and Europe, we've moved away from the budget. We'll come back to a few things on that, but we have tomorrow here in Spain a general strike. Now, it's going to be pretty well backed, because, of course, we have a socialist government now. We had a socialist government last time, should I say, and they were a bit sort of muted about it. They didn't really want to go against a socialist government so much, but it's going to be very different with the People's Party in power now. I think tomorrow is going to be a big strike. Now, part of it's to do with measures that they're not even going to be told about until Friday. They don't even know what the measures are, but they're striking now based on the kind of things that they're seeing. Now, our Spanish Prime Minister has said 15 billion worth of cuts he's putting in place now, with a further 40 billion down the road. Now, I guess what he's trying to do is he's trying to fend off the likes of these people coming after Spain next, after Portugal, by making these announcements now. But it's not enough, is it?
It's interesting you say it's not enough. They tried it in Ireland. They tried it in Greece. It doesn't work. It absolutely doesn't work. The only solution is to tell the banks where to go. The banks loaned all this money to those countries at the same rate of interest that they loaned to far more successful and far more prudent Germany. How could they possibly lend to Greece and Spain at the same 2.5% or 3% rate that they loaned to Germany? They knew they weren't going to get the money back. but they also knew, I'm talking about the banks, they also knew that they would be bailed out by the taxpayers, by the politicians. So, in fact, the Greek politicians, the Irish politicians, the Spaniards and the Portuguese, the Italians, you name it, the British, we should all tell the bankers where to go, because they should not be being bailed out time after time. Do you know what, Kenny? There is, metaphorically, a massive upturned funnel of money coming from the masses and being sucked up to the top 1 or maybe even the top 0.1% of the wealthy in the world. That is the ugly state that we are in. We should tell the bankers where to go. At the same time, we shouldn't kowtow to the trades unions who, let's face it, there are far too many people working in the public sector. There are far too many people with earning more than true profits can actually provide for. So we need also to cut the salaries and pensions of those in the public sector, and we need to deregulate employment. So it's a twofold thing we should do. But, you know, on the one hand, you're saying the politicians are saying they're going to cut. On the other hand, you're telling me that there's going to be a national strike in Spain. Do you know what? They tried it in Greece. It doesn't work. Spain is going down the pan, as is Portugal, as is the other countries we've already talked about.
Well, it's very depressing news. I think you probably got a very good point. But I mean, I'll tell you now that one of the things that the reasons they're going on this strike is because they're making it easier they're going to make it easier to lay people off. We have a finiquita here, which is a sum that people get 45 days a year.
Yeah, because Kenny, if you were an employer and you knew that if someone was a slacker or an idiot, you couldn't get rid of them, do you think you would take on another employee for the rest of your working life?
But that's the problem now. I know people who have businesses here who have employed someone. They've had them there for 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. They can't get rid of them for two reasons. One, because they need a ridiculously, unbelievably good reason, and more so than they're just not good enough at their job anymore, and also that they are just sitting it out waiting to pick up this final payment, which is so much. There are places here on the Costa del Sol, I'll tell you straight, there are places here where the owner of restaurants, and I know two, have given the restaurants to a number of staff, given it to them as their payoff because he couldn't afford to pay them off.
Yeah, exactly. So, you know, the people in some of these countries who question why there's such high unemployment, it's not just because the bankers are sapping the economic strength of those countries, but it's also because the employment laws stop people from being employed.
Yes. Well, in Greece, would I be right in saying that they just looked after themselves too much? They gave themselves too good a pay rises, too good a pensions, too good a working hours, and eventually the other foot hit the floor and it was all over.
Exactly. Every time anyone went to a parliamentarian and said, we need more money, they were given it. I had nothing against bus drivers. In fact, I love bus journeys as it happens. But it's a fascinating thing that if you were a bus driver in Greece, you earned £60,000 or £70,000 a year. I don't think that needs any further comment.
No, absolutely. I mean, we're talking about the tanker drivers who are possibly going to go on strike next week. We won't get into what's gone on today because that's just absolutely ludicrous. And if that's not a political war, then I don't know what is. That was absolutely disgraceful today. I tell you what, we've got one of your fans on here, so we're going to get her on. Sharon's here. Good evening, Sharon.
Hello, good evening to you both. I still think the bankers are continuing to have their long holidays, though, aren't they, and their pensions in place. Would I be right, Jonathan?
Oh, absolutely. The bankers are laughing all the way, pardon the pun, to the bank. They're killing themselves laughing. They can't believe that they're getting away with proverbial murder. But they've been doing it for years, and they're still doing it.
And we're not allowed to. I think this is the people who threaten strikes. You're absolutely right. It's totally wrong. But they see the monetary system as remaining just the same and nothing being done about it. And they think, blow it, I'm going to have my go now. But can I ask you a question? On the news this evening, I heard that I think it was Osborne, said that when we have public holidays, for example, for the royal wedding or the Queen's Silver Jubilee, he's using this as the reason why our economic state goes down the pan, and he's not down the pan. It's already down the pan, but it goes. I think its GDP goes down, and I think it's a bit of an excuse. Okay, we all know. Is that because the economic state of the country is so on the waterline that even just one day out for a public holiday?
Can I just jump in before you finish that question, Sharon? I'll tell you for why, because I have this exact thing written down in front of me as you've just said. Only I believe it was Mervyn King that said it today.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. I think it was him who said it, but you're absolutely right.
Mervyn King.
And you know what? I wrote exactly the same as you. Are we honestly saying, here are, Jonathan, this is what Sharon and I are both saying to you, are we honestly saying that our economy is so finely balanced that a couple of extra days off for bank holidays during the Olympics is going to tip the balance between us going into profit or not?
And for the royal wedding last year.
Oh, yes, of course, yes.
The answer simply is yes. Put into context, as I say, even with the biggest borrowings and pumping of the system in history from 2009 to date, we are still not getting any economic growth. So absolutely, a few days lost of production or of retailing, yes, it is going to have an effect on the economy. And this is where the incoming government got it totally wrong. 2 years ago, when they came in with their win, they should have said, do you know what, that Liam Byrne bloke was right. We've run out of money. The economy is about to go over the cliff. And they should have let it go over the cliff as it happens. They should have taken 2 or 3 years of hard recession from which our government would not have the debts that it has. We would have found that our currency would have gone through the roof. Our cost of imports would have gone through the floor. Our cost of manufacturing would have gone through the floor. And indeed, we could have rebooted the system as a lower cost, high quality economy. We would have had 20 or 30 years of growth. Instead, we've got 20 years or 30 years of depression. And the politicians in charge now are saying basically exactly the same as the previous lot. There is no difference between them.
No, and they were looking for the next election as well, of course. One final question, Jonathan. 2 or 3 months ago, a bit longer than that actually, you came on and gave an intriguing interview about the investors and the traders speculating on fresh water, possibility of doing that. Is that still likely in view of what's happened since you gave that interview?
Yes. What it was... At the time, there was discussions in the markets that the city guys in Wall Street and the city in Madrid and Frankfurt, they were going to create a market, as Sharon says, in water, which ultimately means when the global finance guys make markets, it ultimately means that they own the assets. They're going to own most of the property in the world. They're going to own most of the shares in companies in the world. And I'll tell you, and this is so frightening, I don't know if it's going to be in 10 years or 40 years or 60 years, but I'll tell you, in due course, the bankers will own most of the water in the world.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. I didn't know whether that had died a death because of the economic crash, but no, far from it. I thought so. Thanks a lot, Jonathan. Cheers. Thanks, Kenny.
Thanks, Sharon. Take care.
Bye.
I wasn't going to sort of speak over Sharon's credit there while she was phoning us in, but I will just tell you, Sharon would know, I'm sure she heard it. I did an interview on Monday night with one of the directors of the desalination group of the world. They're based in America. There are something like 16,000 desalination plants across the world now, and they're growing all the time. And he tells me that the systems are so good and getting better by the day that is not going to be a problem for the future as people were predicting before, but only because the technology now has got to the point where it's costing them something like 50 cents to produce 1,000 litres of drinking water.
However, Kenny, when the bankers get involved and start lending the desalination plants money to invest in whatever else, and when those desalination plant guys go bust, the bankers will take possession of the desalination plants.
Yes, well,
that's the way the system works.
Yeah, I mean, you've actually taken the words right out of my mouth. I did actually ask the question: did I ever see them go? Did they? No, you're right, but I wanted to give you a chance to respond first. You're absolutely right. That's exactly what he said. I said, "Do you see these things going private in the future?" And he said, "I can't speak for now, but the plants are getting bigger and more highly tech, so probably yes." And you're absolutely right. That's what'll happen, as you say. The banks will loan the money. Eventually, they'll probably default. They'll loan them, and that's how they play their monopoly game, I suppose, isn't it? Listen, we are really, really out of time, but I have to ask you this question because I know it's a big thing for you. You're a supporter of state funding for political parties, aren't you?
Oh, very much so. Very strong supporter, yeah.
Yes, and what's gone on, all this stuff that we've seen, I mean, I think a lot of it was rubbish. I do believe that this Peter Cruddas was just talking out of his hat and he was trying to make a name for himself. But having said that, what would you see happening? I mean, presumably that means you've got to take away the unions' money. The Labour government can't have that either, and they both start from a level playing field. Is that what you would advocate?
I would certainly. During Labour's time, we had the likes of the Formula One guy giving £1 million to Tony Blair.
Bernie Ecclestone, yes.
Thank you. So some changes benefiting Bernie and Formula One. Recently, as you say, you've seen the ex-Tory Treasurer had to resign, telling people that for £250,000 they can get dinner at number 10 with the Prime Minister. In other words, all those current political parties, they play the money game, as you say. On the left, they've got the trade unions giving them millions and millions, and on the right, they've got the billionaires giving them millions and millions. In other words, ultimately, we have no competition in politics. And it's not surprising at all that every single politician you hear is against state funding of politicians, of political parties. I am a strong supporter of state funding political parties because it would bring in competition, and that is where we have a malaise in Western democracy. There's no competition. You mentioned about the Spanish guy cutting, but actually he's doing exactly the same as the previous lot. He's supporting the bankers.
Yes.
Similarly, the Brits are doing the same thing right across the world. They're all doing the same thing as whatever the previous lot were doing, whether they move from left to right or right to left. There's a wafer-thin difference between the parties. They pretend there's a Grand Canyon, but that's their job. Their job is to pretend that they're different. They're not.
Jonathan, as always when talking to you, I end up feeling enlightened and depressed all at the same time. But I do appreciate your comments. You're a wealth of knowledge. Thank you so much for being with us tonight.
My great pleasure. All the best, Kenny.
Have a great evening. Thanks, Jonathan. Take care.
Bye.